Welcome to StartupHakk. Today we're going to start a new series about helping entrepreneurs learn to code. And I'm going to be demonstrating some very simple principles that'll get anyone started to be able to start writing some code and start helping you build your business, which I believe is a foundational principle for every developer, for every entrepreneur nowadays. I believe every entrepreneur is better off if they can at least learn some of the very basics of coding to build it, if nothing else, be able to work with other developers or even to be able to start building their own application themselves. So let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to StartupHakk. My name is Spencer Thomason. I am the CEO and co-founder of CleanRouter, as well as many other products. Here are some lessons that I've learned building a successful business while challenging startup norms. My challenge is to push you to rethink startup success. Welcome to StartupHakk. All right, so let's go ahead and dig in and get started. So you're going to have to bear with me as I switch back and forth between things. But I know one of the very first questions that I get from people who are starting to code for the first time is, what is the best way to code? Now, it depends on which technology you're going to be building. But in this case, this series is going to be using .NET or .NET Core. For that, you definitely are going to want to either use Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code. Now, as you can see here, there's various different applications that you can use for coding with .NET. Now, the most common one is Visual Studio, and there is a free one, and I would say pretty much any entrepreneur who's starting really doesn't need anything more than the free version, so this community edition of the Visual Studio. If you're working on a Mac, you can get the free download for Mac, and also if you prefer to use Visual Studio Code, I can show some demos about Visual Studio Code versus Visual Studio. Today we're going to show a little bit of the difference between the two, and so very first place you want to start is with downloading both of these. And obviously you're going to want to download for the environment that you're using. So let's go ahead and download both and get those installed. So I'm going to go ahead and cut forward to where those are both installed. And so now that we have both of these installed, let's start talking a little bit about Visual Studio. So you can see that we can start with a really simple Hello World app. And a lot of times what you're going to want to do is open a new project. And so you hit create a new project here. And once it starts to look, in this case, we're going to just start with a very simple core web app. And so you can select this and click next. And once you've clicked next here, then you can name the project. So one of the first things you're going to want to learn about is about how Visual Studio works with these projects. I personally like to always put my code into just C code. It's a really easy place. I don't put it into any of the user directories or anything. A lot of those can get really complicated. So if you want to change the location, if yours is defaulting to somewhere else, you're just going to want to go to C, and then I put code, and then this is where I put all of my various different code. So in this case, we're going to call this our StartupHakk Hello World. Leaving C code. I'm going to go ahead and let the solution name be the same thing, and I'm going to tell it to place the solution and the project into the same folder. That's my preference. Everybody has a little bit of their own preference. In this case, we're going to be building everything with .NET Core version 6, which has long-term support. I'm not going to go with any HTTPS for right now, and no authentication type for right now. There are some other ones that you can do, but that's going to build a little bit more into the app than we want to tackle for right now. If you wanted to get into Docker, we're going to do a series around Docker later, but for right now, we're going to keep this pretty simple and click next. I'm going to resize my window here to make sure that you all can see the various different parts of the window. Now, this is going to pop up another window here, so that's kind of the wizard that's going to step you through. So now I'm going to change it back over here, and we'll go back to Visual Studio here. Okay, so now you can see that we have an application here, and we're ready to get started on coding. So this is one of the first things that you'll see with Visual Studio is you'll see the solution over here on the right-hand side. This right-hand side of the solution, you can see the various different parts about connected services, dependencies, properties, and the www. So in this case, this is where you would then have your different web application files, CSS, JavaScript, and some of your library files. And this is where you can get into various different pieces. You can also see some of your page files with the CS HTML. Now all this probably sounds a little Greek to you at this point, But at the end of, to get started, you'd be able to start writing the code at the very beginning of the startup. And so with C#, the programs all start with program.cs. So this is always where your program will start. And you can see just with a very few simple lines of code, you have your project. Now, if you want to run this project, which comes out of the box ready for you to go, you can click play, and it will start up the debugger, which you'll see down here at the bottom. And you can see all the files for the project over here on the right-hand side. And then you can see this will pop up and will run. You can see the console window running down in the bottom. And you'll see there's a web app that pops up. So let me switch back over to that web app. And this web app here, switch the screens really quick. You'll see we'll start with this hello world. And so this is nothing more than our hello world. So this is a good example of Visual Studio and just coming with an out-of-the-box template that you can start up and run and kick off and run the application. So definitely built for bigger projects as you're starting to run. It's much more robust in the debugger. A lot of things work just kind of out of the box. So now what we're going to do to demonstrate is we're going to demonstrate the same thing using Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Visual Studio Code now. And we're going to give that 1 second while it opens. All right, now Visual Studio Code is a little bit more than a glorified text editor initially. Now, I know there's going to be a lot of people who get really bugged out the fact that I just called Visual Studio Code a text editor. It's obviously a lot more than that. You can actually use it, and there are a lot of people who use it as their full-time IDE or integrated development environment. However, it out of the box does not come nearly as robust as Visual Studio does, as the full version of Visual Studio. However, one of the things about Visual Studio Code that's great is its cross-platform abilities. It's also great because you can add a lot of plugins. So there's a lot of extensions and plugins that you can do that will make Visual Studio Code very close to what Visual Studio will do out of the box. So one of the first things then we're going to do is we're going to open the folder, and I'm going to go ahead and just reuse that project that we created for us before. So we had our StartupHakk Hello World project. I'm going to go ahead and tell it to open this folder. So now it's going to first pop up and ask if I trust this because it recognizes something, it could run some dangerous code there in the meantime. So now the same ways that we saw Visual Studio running with this, we can see here the same program.cs. So in Visual Studio Code, you can see right off the bat that you'll be able to open the exact same project and be able to do the same things with it. We can expand and look at the JavaScript and CSS. You'll see that the syntax highlighting works just as well. And in fact, some cases, I think the view is a little bit nicer in Visual Studio Code. And so as we work in Visual Studio Code now, we can work with how we're going to work in Visual Studio Code. Now, one thing that you'll notice down here in the bottom is it's asking, hey, required assets are required. So in order to be able to compile this, it recognizes it needs the C# compiler extension. So I'm going to tell it yes, because it'll automatically add that for me. Now, if I want to build this, I can also run it, and we can say start debugging, or we can also just build it. Now, with .NET, you can actually run the command line, which is one of the advantages to running .NET because it is fully cross-platform now. The new .NET Core is cross-platform for a lot of different operating systems. So, but let's go ahead and run this, just doing the kind of the same apples to apples that we did with Visual Studio. So you'll see that the terminal will pop up, and these outputs, you can actually see exactly what it's running in the various different terminals. So you can see actually the exact commands. So here's the debugging console, and it's running through a lot of this. And then in the same way that we had a Hello World sample come up, I'm going to go ahead and switch over here to the other browser. So now you'll see that we have the Hello World that's running from Visual Studio Code. So you can see that both applications run the exact same program, and both applications work very similarly. In general, Visual Studio is much more powerful, works out of the box for a lot of these type of things, whereas VS Code is going to be more of a glorified text editor. Again, I'm probably going to get lots of comments down in the comments below, so I welcome those. But out of the box, it is a lot more than a glorified text editor, and because of that, it's going to require a little bit more knowledge to be able to know how to set up and how to run. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing because it gives you exact control over what exact pieces you want to do. So I'm going to switch back over to Visual Studio Code. And in Visual Studio Code, you can, and so the application thinks it's still running. So you can see it's not as robust. I closed the browser, and it didn't notice this. The hooks between the two aren't as robust. However, you can still access all the same files, do the exact same coding. The IntelliSense is still good. You can see that it still will use, a lot of the same IntelliSense, and it'll still give you a lot of the same suggestions. So overall, we're going to find that as we run through these samples, whether you use Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio is really just a personal preference. I'm going to go ahead and use Visual Studio. I think for a starting entrepreneur, the free version of Community of Visual Studio is going to give you a much more robust experience. If you're on Linux, you're going to have to use Visual Studio Code. I do all my hosting on Linux, but I actually do development on Windows since I've been a .NET developer for over 20 years. So feel free to leave your comments down below. I'd love to hear people know whether my opinion on starting this series with Visual Studio Code versus Visual Studio is going to be a big difference or not. So leave your comments below. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel because we're going to be giving this ongoing series is going to be a great new way for any entrepreneur to be able to start from pretty much zero and to be able to work forward at running and learning to develop, and all of this for free. So make sure you like and subscribe, and we will catch you guys next time.